A lone woman, deep in the wilderness, hears a desperate cry echoing through the canyon. As she rushes toward the edge of a towering cliff, her heart stops. A tiny grizzly bear cub is clinging to a narrow ledge, its paws slipping on loose rocks. One wrong move, and it will fall to certain death. With no time to think, she risks her own life to save the helpless creature. But what happens next is beyond anything she could have imagined. Stay with us for a story of courage, survival, and an unbreakable connection between a woman and the wild. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. The mountains had always been Isabella Carter's escape. As a wildlife photographer, she had spent countless days alone in the wilderness, capturing the raw beauty of nature. But today, nature had led her to something she never expected to find. The wind howled as she hiked through the rugged terrain of Montana's Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. The late afternoon sun cast golden light over the endless valleys and jagged peaks. Then, a cry, high-pitched, desperate. Isabella froze, her body instinctively tensing. She turned her head, scanning the rocky cliffs ahead. The sound echoed again, closer this time. Something was wrong. She quickened her pace, her boots kicking up dust as she made her way toward the edge of a steep ravine. The wind carried the frantic cries up through the canyon, twisting her stomach into knots. And then she saw it. A tiny grizzly bear cub, stranded on a narrow ledge, its claws slipping against the loose rock. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. The cub was terrified, its small frame shaking as it struggled to stay on the ledge. One wrong move, and it would fall. Her mind raced. Where was its mother? Had it wandered too far? It didn't matter. If she didn't act fast, it wouldn't survive. Isabella dropped her backpack, her heart pounding. The ledge was barely wide enough to hold the cub's small body. The drop below was lethal. There was no easy way down. She frantically scanned the area for something, anything to help her reach the cub. A fallen tree stretched across part of the ravine, its trunk partially wedged between two boulders. It was risky, too risky, but Isabella didn't have a choice. She tested the tree's stability, gripping the rough bark with trembling fingers. It creaked under her weight, but it held. Carefully, she inched her way out over the drop, her body trembling as the wind roared around her. The cub let out another desperate cry. "I'm coming," she murmured, more to herself than to the animal. One step, then another. Below her, the canyon stretched hundreds of feet into the abyss. The air felt too thin, the world too quiet. Finally, she reached the edge of the ledge. Now came the hardest part, getting the cub to trust her. The cub's dark, fearful eyes locked onto hers. It was cornered, helpless. If it panicked, if it tried to move, it would fall. Isabella lowered herself onto the ledge, pressing her body against the rock. The cub whimpered, its tiny claws slipping on the loose gravel. She extended her hand, keeping her voice soft and steady. "It's okay," she whispered. "I won't hurt you." The cub trembled, its little chest rising and falling in frantic breaths. Then, a gust of wind. A small rock crumbled from the ledge, tumbling into the abyss below. The cub's back paws slipped. Isabella lunged. Isabella's world blurred as she lunged forward, her fingers grasping for anything to keep the cub from falling. Her heart stopped as she felt fur slip through her fingertips. Then, a sudden grip. She had caught it. But now she was dangling over the edge of the cliff. The tiny bear cub's terrified whimpers filled the air as it clung to her sleeve with desperate claws. Below them, the canyon stretched into a terrifying abyss of nothingness. Isabella's arms burned as she strained to keep them both from falling. The ledge beneath her was crumbling, bits of loose rock tumbling into the void. She had seconds to act, and then she heard something that made her blood run cold. A deep, guttural growl from behind her. The mother bear had arrived. Isabella's breath hitched. She turned her head slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. And there she was, a massive grizzly bear standing at the edge of the cliff. Her dark eyes locked onto Isabella, her nostrils flaring as she took in the scene. The cub, her baby, was in Isabella's grasp, hanging over the edge. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Isabella's pulse pounded in her ears. Was the bear about to attack? Or did she understand? The mother bear let out another low, warning growl, stepping closer. Isabella's arms shook from the strain. She knew she couldn't hold on much longer. She had one chance to save the cub and herself. Isabella took a deep breath, forcing herself to think. She had spent years studying wildlife behavior, and she knew one thing for sure: grizzlies are fiercely protective mothers. If she made the wrong move, this could end badly. But if she did nothing, the cub would die. Summoning every ounce of strength left in her body, she made a desperate choice. With a grunt, Isabella swung her arm up, pushing the cub toward the ledge where its mother stood. For a split second, she thought she had failed. Then, the mother bear lunged. Her massive paw scooped the cub up, lifting it to safety just as Isabella's grip gave out. She felt her body slipping. Her stomach dropped. She was falling. The world turned into a blur of rushing air and twisting rock. Isabella tumbled down the cliffside, hitting sharp edges as she plummeted toward the canyon floor. Her mind screamed for her to grab onto something, anything. Then, impact. Her body slammed into a thick tree branch jutting out from the side of the cliff. Pain exploded through her ribs. The branch snapped, but it slowed her fall just enough. She crashed into a small outcropping of rock, her body aching, but alive. Above her, she could barely make out the silhouette of the mother bear standing at the ledge. The cub was safe. But now, Isabella was the one who needed saving. She tried to move, but agony shot through her body. Her left leg. Something was wrong. She looked down and felt her stomach churn. A deep gash ran along her calf, blood seeping into her torn pants. She was hurt, and she was trapped on a ledge halfway down the canyon wall with no way to climb back up. The sky above was darkening. The temperature was dropping fast. If she didn't figure out a way to escape soon, she wouldn't survive the night. She tried to steady her breathing, forcing herself to think. Then, a sound from above. She looked up and felt her heart skip a beat. The mother bear was still there, and she wasn't leaving. She was watching Isabella, as if she knew, as if she understood. And then, for the first time in her life, Isabella dared to hope. Maybe the bear wasn't done saving her just yet. Isabella lay motionless on the narrow rock ledge, her breaths ragged. Pain pulsed through her leg. Her ribs ached from the fall, and the sharp wind cut through her damp clothes like ice. She wasn't sure how long she had been lying there. Minutes? Hours? But she knew one thing for sure. If she didn't find a way out soon, she wouldn't last the night. The canyon was dangerously cold at night, and she was injured, stranded, and completely alone, or so she thought. Then she heard it, a deep exhale from above. She turned her head slowly, her pulse spiking, and there, standing at the edge of the cliff, looking down at her, was the mother bear. The massive grizzly's dark eyes locked onto Isabella's. The cub was nestled against its mother's side, safe, because of Isabella's actions. And now, Isabella was the one who needed help. The irony of it all wasn't lost on her. But what could the bear do? She was stuck, too far down to climb, too injured to move. Still, the mother bear didn't leave. She sat down at the ledge, watching, waiting. And that's when Isabella realized. She wasn't alone. Not really. As the sun dipped lower, the temperature plummeted. Isabella's fingers were numb, her body shivering violently. She knew the signs. Hypothermia was setting in. She had to move, had to stay awake, had to do something. With a deep breath, she forced herself to sit up, pain shooting through her leg like fire. She gritted her teeth, looking for anything she could use to help herself. Her backpack. It had fallen a few feet away, caught on a small outcrop of rock. Inside, her emergency flare gun. If she could reach it, she might have a chance. Isabella's hands trembled as she dragged herself toward the pack, every movement sending waves of agony through her injured leg. The rock beneath her was unstable, loose gravel shifting with each movement. She stretched out her arm, just a little more. Her fingers brushed against the strap. Almost there. Then, the rock beneath her crumbled. She slid downward, her stomach lurching. A sharp yelp of panic escaped her lips as her body teetered over the edge. This was it. She was going to fall. And then, something massive moved above her. The mother bear let out a deep, rumbling huff, and then she did something Isabella never could have predicted. She moved down the slope, not toward the cub, toward her. Isabella's breath caught. The grizzly bear, this wild, untamed creature, was coming to her, and she wasn't attacking. She was helping. The bear carefully maneuvered down the slope, her massive paws finding solid ground. Then she stopped, just a few feet above Isabella. She didn't growl, didn't charge. She simply stood there, watching, as if she was waiting for Isabella to trust her. And in that moment, Isabella knew. This bear was here for a reason. She wasn't the enemy. She was the only hope Isabella had left. Isabella's hands were shaking. This was insane. She was trapped on the edge of a cliff, and now her only option was a grizzly bear. But what choice did she have? She took a deep, shuddering breath. Then, she reached out. Not to grab the bear, but to let the bear decide. She stretched out her trembling fingers, offering them. A silent agreement. The grizzly bear lowered her head. She sniffed Isabella's outstretched hand. Then, with impossibly gentle strength, she nudged Isabella's arm, pushing her slightly back toward solid ground. Isabella's breath hitched. She had just been saved by a bear. The bear didn't leave. She sat beside Isabella on the narrow ledge, her warm body blocking the wind. The cub, still above, let out a soft whimper, but the mother bear stayed right there, as if keeping watch. Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, exhaustion taking hold. She had no idea what was happening, no idea why this bear was helping her. All she knew was this: she had saved the cub. And now the mother bear was saving her. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something neither of them could explain. And as the stars glittered above them, Isabella realized, if she got out of this alive, she would never look at the wild the same way again. The night stretched on, long and unforgiving. Isabella lay on the cold rock, her body aching, her breath coming in short gasps. Above her, the mother bear remained, her massive form silhouetted against the night sky. The cub had settled a short distance away, safe, because of Isabella. And now, she was the one being protected. The air was frigid. Isabella's body trembled violently, the signs of hypothermia creeping in. She knew she had to stay awake, had to keep moving, but she was so tired. Her eyelids grew heavy, the pain in her leg dulled, and just as she felt herself slipping into unconsciousness, a heavy breath warmed her face. Isabella's eyes snapped open. The mother bear was standing right beside her, watching, waiting, protecting. And at that moment, Isabella realized the bear was making a choice. For centuries, humans had feared grizzlies. They were apex predators, creatures of the wild that commanded respect, and sometimes terror. But as Isabella lay there, staring into the deep, knowing eyes of the bear beside her, she felt something entirely different. She wasn't afraid. She felt safe. The bear huffed softly, then settled down, pressing her warm body slightly against Isabella's side. The heat was instant. The wind still howled around them, but now it wasn't unbearable. The bear had just done something extraordinary. She had chosen to share her warmth with a human. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. The bear didn't answer, of course, but she didn't leave either. Isabella drifted in and out of sleep, waking to the faint glow of dawn breaking over the canyon. She was alive, and so was the bear. The mother grizzly rose to her feet, stretching her massive frame as the cub tumbled toward her, playful and unaware of the night's weight. For a moment, Isabella thought, this is it. This is goodbye. The bear had saved her, and now she would disappear into the wild. But then, a sound shattered the peace. A gunshot. The mother bear froze, her ears snapping forward. The cub let out a frightened squeak, pressing against her legs. Isabella's heart dropped. Another shot echoed through the canyon, and suddenly she understood. They weren't alone. Isabella's mind raced. Was it hunters? Poachers? Had someone spotted the bear and decided she was a trophy? Panic surged through her veins. The mother bear was in danger. The cub was in danger. And so was she. Isabella struggled to sit up, her leg burning in protest. The bear looked at her, eyes sharp, alert. For the first time, Isabella realized she wasn't the only one who had learned to trust. The bear had stayed by her side all night. Now, it was her turn to return the favor. Isabella forced herself to think through the pain. The bear couldn't stay here. Neither could she. She needed a way to warn them, to send them away before it was too late. She reached for her backpack, fumbling for the flare gun. Her fingers wrapped around it, her heart hammering. She turned toward the mother bear, meeting her gaze. "Go," Isabella whispered, her voice hoarse. "Get your cub and go." The bear hesitated. Then, as if understanding, she nuzzled the cub forward. Isabella's throat tightened. She wanted to believe she would see them again, but she knew, if they stayed, they wouldn't survive. She lifted the flare gun toward the sky, and with one last silent farewell, she pulled the trigger. Chapter 5. A Dangerous Gamble. The flare shot into the sky, bursting into a brilliant red explosion above the canyon. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, chaos. The mother bear let out a deep guttural huff, nudging the cub further away. Her muscles tensed, her instincts on high alert. Isabella's hands trembled as she lowered the flare gun. She had bought them a chance, but at what cost? The sound of rushed footsteps echoed through the trees. Two figures emerged at the cliff's edge, rifles slung over their shoulders. Hunters. One of them, a burly man in a camouflage jacket, narrowed his eyes at the retreating bear. "Would you look at that?" he muttered, gripping his gun tighter. "That's a big one." Isabella's stomach dropped. She had been hoping to scare them off, but instead she had led them right to the bears. The second hunter, a younger man with sharp features, frowned. "You sure about this? Park rangers will be all over us if we get caught." The older man scoffed. "Nobody's out here this deep. We take the shot, drag her out before anyone notices." Isabella's heart pounded. No. Not after everything. Not after this bear had saved her life. She had to stop them. Summoning every ounce of strength, Isabella pushed herself up, wincing as pain flared through her injured leg. "You can't," she gasped, her voice shaking. "She's not just an animal." The older hunter turned to her with an amused expression. "Oh? What is she then? Your pet?" "She saved me," Isabella said, her voice firm despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "If it weren't for her, I'd be dead right now." The younger hunter hesitated, his grip loosening on his gun. The older one, however, only laughed. "Lady, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." He raised his rifle, and before Isabella could react, a thunderous roar split the air. The grizzly bear charged. She had seen the gun. She had felt the threat, and she had made her decision. The hunter barely had time to react before 400 pounds of raw power barreled toward him. He stumbled backward, his rifle slipping from his grasp as the bear reared up, towering over him. For the first time, fear flashed in his eyes. The younger hunter bolted, disappearing into the trees. The older one wasn't so lucky. The mother bear let out a deafening snarl, her massive paws slamming into the ground just inches from his chest. The man froze, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. For a moment, everything hung in terrifying silence. Then, the bear stepped back. She didn't attack. She could have ended him in an instant. But she didn't. Instead, she turned, nudging her cub once more toward the forest. And as if making one last statement, she locked eyes with the hunter. A silent warning. Then, she was gone. The hunter collapsed to his knees, shaken. Isabella watched, her heart hammering. This bear, This creature the world saw as a monster had just spared his life. Finally, the man exhaled, staring at the trees where the grizzly had disappeared. "Never seen one do that before," he muttered. Isabella swallowed hard. "Maybe you were never paying attention." He looked at her, and for the first time he had nothing to say. Slowly he stood, picking up his rifle, not to use it, but to sling it over his back. Without another word, he turned and followed his partner into the woods. They were gone. And the bears? They were safe. For now. Isabella let out a shaky breath, her body finally relaxing for the first time in hours. But she knew this wasn't over. Her connection to that bear wasn't over, and somehow, deep in her soul, she felt it. Their paths would cross again. The hunters were gone. The mother bear and her cub had disappeared into the wilderness, and Isabella was alone again. For a moment, she simply sat there, her body exhausted, her mind racing. Everything that had happened felt surreal. A bear had saved her. A bear had spared a man's life. And now, she had to save herself. Her legs still throbbed, but she knew she couldn't stay here. The cold was creeping in again, the sun dipping lower behind the canyon walls. She had one goal now: get out of the wilderness alive. Isabella scanned the rocky terrain. There was only one way up. The climb wouldn't be easy, especially with her injury. But she had no choice. Using a fallen branch as a crutch, she pulled herself up, every movement sending jolts of pain through her body. She gritted her teeth, one step at a time. The jagged rock face loomed before her, steep and unforgiving. She tested each foothold carefully, her fingers gripping the rough stone. The higher she climbed, the harder it became. Her arms shook, her vision blurred. She could feel herself slipping. Then, a sound. A low, familiar huff. Isabella's breath caught. She turned her head slowly. And there, at the top of the ridge, was the mother bear, watching her, waiting. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Isabella felt something deep in her chest, an unspoken understanding. The bear had led her here, had protected her, had taught her to trust. And now, it was as if she was telling Isabella to keep going. She took a deep breath, and she climbed. With every painful movement, she thought of that bear, her strength, her resilience, her ability to fight for survival. And finally, with one last pull, Isabella reached the top. She collapsed, gasping for breath, the world spinning around her. When she opened her eyes again, the bear was gone. Isabella forced herself to stand. The tree line was ahead. Somewhere beyond those trees, her cabin, her safe place. She began limping forward, the cold biting at her skin. The night was coming fast. Every step was a battle. But she kept going. Because now, she wasn't just walking for herself. She was walking for the bear who had saved her. The first stars were appearing by the time she finally reached the edge of the forest. Her cabin was still miles away, but she knew she would make it. She turned one last time, looking back toward the canyon. And then, she saw them. Two dark silhouettes standing at the ridge. The mother bear and her cub, watching, saying goodbye. Tears stung Isabella's eyes. She lifted a trembling hand in the air, a silent farewell. And as if understanding, the bear let out a low, soft huff, then turned and disappeared into the night. Isabella didn't know if she would ever see the bear again, but she knew one thing. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It was a story of trust, survival, and an unbreakable bond between a woman and the most feared predator of the wild. And as she took her final steps toward home, she made a promise. She would tell this story, because maybe, just maybe, it would change the way the world saw grizzly bears forever. Isabella stood at the edge of the forest, watching as the mother bear and her cub disappeared into the wild. The wind carried their scent away, and just like that, they were gone. For the first time since the ordeal began, she was truly alone. But something inside her had changed. She wasn't the same woman who had stepped into the mountains days ago. She had gone to capture the wild. And instead, the wild had captured her. Her cabin was still miles away, and her body was exhausted beyond measure. But she kept moving. With every step, her mind raced with everything that had happened. The cub, the mother bear, the trust they had built, the dangers they had faced, the impossible choices that had bound their fates together. And one undeniable truth: without that bear, she wouldn't be alive. She gritted her teeth against the pain in her leg and pushed forward. This was no longer just her story. This was the bear's story, too, and the world needed to hear it. By the time Isabella reached her cabin, dawn was breaking. She collapsed onto the wooden porch, her muscles aching, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She was home, alive. But now, she had a mission. She wasn't just a wildlife photographer anymore. She was a witness. She had seen something few people ever would: a grizzly bear, not as a monster, but as a protector, and she was going to make sure the world knew. She limped inside and immediately grabbed her camera. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the images she had taken before the accident. The canyon, the towering trees, the deep, untamed wild. And then, the bear. Photo after photo of the mother and her cub captured before fate had thrown them together. But now, those pictures meant something more. They weren't just images of an animal in the wild. They were proof. Proof that grizzlies were more than just dangerous beasts. Proof that humans and nature weren't always enemies. Proof that, in the most unexpected of moments, trust could be found where fear was supposed to exist. For days, Isabella wrote. She documented every detail. The moment she first heard the cub's cry, the fear of the rescue, the silent trust that had formed in the darkness of the canyon. She wrote about the hunters, about the gunshot, about the bear's decision not to kill, and finally, about that final glance, that silent goodbye between two beings who had saved each other. When she was finished, she submitted her story to every major wildlife journal, every conservation magazine she could think of. She didn't care about the risks. She didn't care if people thought she was crazy. She just wanted the world to see the bear the way she had, as a survivor, a mother, a guardian, a part of the wild that deserved to live. Weeks passed. Then The emails started coming in, one after another. Journalists, conservationists, wildlife activists. They all wanted to hear her story. Her words spread like wildfire, shared, reprinted, talked about in forums and news outlets. People listened. For the first time, they saw grizzly bears not just as predators, but as living, thinking creatures. And Isabella knew this was bigger than her. This was a fight worth having. One evening, months after the incident, Isabella found herself standing at the edge of the wilderness once more. The snow had melted. The mountains stretched before her, endless and untouched. She closed her eyes and listened. No desperate cries, no gunshots, just the soft rustling of leaves, the whisper of the wind, the heart of the wild still beating. And then she smiled, because she knew, somewhere out there, beyond the trees and the rivers and the untamed earth, they were still there. The mother bear, the cub, living, thriving, free. And maybe, just maybe, they still remembered her too. If this story touched your heart, remember? Wildlife deserves our respect, our protection, and our understanding. If you believe in the power of stories like this one, help us spread the message. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this with someone who loves the wild as much as you do. Together, we can change the way the world sees these incredible animals, one story at a time.